despite the efforts that are made by the government and the society in general to bring about gender inclusivity, we're still seeing a gap between women leaders and men leaders. Now, my name is Lillian Dilwa, and with me today sits Irene Mlola, a woman with an extensive background in the financial sector. We'll be reliving and exploring her career and life background. Now, this is the Citizen Rising Woman 2022 themed Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. Join me in this interesting discussion.
Okay, Irene Mlola is Irene Mlola, as you're seeing. But anyways, just to reflect a bit on my life story, who I am, I think, should come from the story other than just me saying who I am. People should actually be able to figure out. I come from a very humble beginning, working family, where I was born in a family of four, children. My mother and my dad were working. I think, former jobs. My dad was a civil servant for a very long period of time until he retired and went into politics. My mom was working, I think, the beginning part of her career. She was working at there was a pharmaceutical, foreign pharmaceutical company that set up in Tanzania. And before that, she also worked in Tanzania Post telecommunication company in East Africa. So as you can see, I was born in a family where dad and mom were both quite busy. So from the very beginning, I saw really the diversity of roles in the family. Mom was really taking care of us and dad was taking care of us, but all of them doing it in a very shared way and collective way. So I just, learn the different roles, the gender roles, from that sort of a background. And then very shortly thereafter, my mom, who is extremely entrepreneurial, she decided, after, I think, I can say roughly, 10 to 12 years of formal employment, she actually wanted more, and she left her job, and that was a huge shock for all of us as a family, because we were so used for dad and mom, both of them being working formally, employed somewhere. So my mom actually went into business, and she's a serious entrepreneur, because if I sit here and start saying the different sort of business that she did, I will not end, and this interview will be about her. So then you can see mom is everywhere and, quite driven in the different ventures that she will actually take and she will do. Very resilient, very hardcore committed, and does it from very passionate place. And my dad continued to be the civil servant that was working, at that time it was actually Tanzania Post and Telecommunication, and eventually it became just the Post, and the telecommunication was actually on the side, and eventually went into Communication Regulation Authority, TCRA. So you have this a leader, in the post and telecommunication sector, and eventually a regulator, a very committed person to his work, and you have a mother that is actually just extremely passionate in the different ventures that she's taking. So that's really the kind of background that I grew up into. And what I really saw myself really getting from both my father and my mama was basically that a very strong discipline that is actually coming from dad, and the way he actually rose up through the ranks in the various roles that he's gotten. So that really sat in with me and actually gave me this admiration of just wanting to also at some stage also be a leader. So the same thing that I actually saw my dad doing and rising through the ranks and actually being able to deliver in the different roles that he had. But of course, deep inside, there was mom. And mom is the kind of person that will set her mind, will think through, a new business venture. As long as it makes sense, then she starts, going after it. She will do the research, she will forge the relationship, she will get the connection, and she will be so resilient in the way that she will go after it. And when it comes to failure, failure is not an option for her. So those are really some of the qualities that I saw myself growing up with, just getting this really lovely blend of, the qualities that I actually acquired from both my mom and my dad. It is what I've actually seen have actually taken me through the leadership journey.
How did you get to your leadership position that you're in right now? How did you get there?
Well, interesting. Yes, leadership position. I mean, I was fortunate enough, honestly. From my university, I studied my first degree in Canada, and while studying, I was actually in an integrated program that involved both going to school and just working. So that integration of just having a program that you break for 6 months and you actually get a job and then you come back to school, that gave me an early exposure into the workspace. And then immediately the moment I actually graduated, I was actually picked from school into a leadership development program with one of the largest bank in Canada, which is Scotiabank. So I was accelerated immediately, graduating and getting into this leadership. It actually was not called leadership, it was management, acceleration program. So I got into 6 months, I was exposed into the bank, into the different departments, and then immediately thereafter, I was given an operations manager job. So that's really where I got grounded, for the first time. And then the rest really was history.
Having as that kind of experience that you have had in your leadership roles that you've served before and the one that you're serving right now, I'm sure you've come across like several challenges. So can you address like what challenges have you been through and how did you tackle them? How do you still tackle them?
Okay, leadership challenges, there are many, and at the end of the day, I'm such an agile person. I mean, you learn, while you're actually in the trade. As much as, yes, I got into a management acceleration program while with my first formal employment after school. But then I came to Tanzania, and I can say my leadership journey really started at Barclays, which was, you can say, my first formal employment in Tanzania upon returning from Canada. And I was in a position that I was a leader, but I didn't have a title. You know how it is that we use for somebody to be called a manager, we use for somebody just to be called, a head of or a director. But really, I was entrusted, in my view, I feel like I was entrusted with a lot of responsibility. That was the time that the bank was actually settling back again into Tanzania. Barclays Bank, which is now ABSA, was settling back into Tanzania. I was given such huge responsibility with from the managing director to really help it settle. So then I didn't have the title. I didn't have the manager, heads, or whatever. But I was just really a special projects person, executive assistant with special projects that are coming from the MD. So one of the first challenge that I had is like I was very young, and everybody's just looking at me and just wondering, what is this girl, all about? What is it that she actually is going to tell us? What is her title? And I felt like, to some extent, a lot of the leadership style in Tanzania is very autocratic and very much so rank. It depends on the levels and the rank. It depends on who you are so that you can actually tell people. And there I was basically driven by the mission and driven by the objectives to which I actually wanted to see the bank achieving. And then now, without having the title, but at the same time, you are expected to be able to deliver the results. So the first one was like really being looked at as very young, being looked at as somebody who's not necessarily very formal within the ranking of the business, but then being looked at, with huge responsibilities and expectations from the top. So then I actually had to make sure that I spend so much time in making sure that people are actually rallying behind the cause, and they could actually see themselves in whatever I'm delivering, and it's not necessarily a mission that I'm actually taking. So then being able to actually, form the a connected understanding within the people, and just getting the buy-in, and just taking away the fear, because sometimes people just fear that, okay, is she going to be the new director, is she the new head, they just fear those things, as opposed to actually just be able to focus on really what we're supposed to do and the benefit that has on everyone in the organization, and then for the good of the organization. It is something that I actually had to learn at a very young age, and then and that is basically what I can say. It is something that I've seen myself taking and actually moving along with it to the next level. And then also another one is complex stakeholder engagement. At some stage in one's leadership journey, then you realize it's no longer about you being able to rally the employees under you and just getting that collective understanding, and actually being so clear in terms of what you're expecting out of them, and then also allowing them to actually do the job, and your job is actually just to be able to oversee the results. Then you realize that it becomes very complex. It is you mastering that portion, but at the same time you start dealing with the engagements upward, and that's really where it gets hard, because the tricks and the qualities and the basically all your understanding of being able to deal with your employees is completely different with the politics that you go upwards, and then at some stage you go across the industry and you start meeting some of the similar sort of organizations that you need to deal with. And in some of the roles that I needed to deliver, it did not necessarily depend within my organization, but it depends on me being able to convince other peers and other people who are in the sector who have those roles in order to be able to deliver. So that whole very complex and multiple stakeholder engagement, but at the same time being able to manage your own employees and stay focused, is really something that I've actually had to overcome throughout my leadership journey. Yeah.
There are other people who actually make different sacrifices that actually kind of makes them who they are. Now, have you ever made any personal sacrifices across the years?
Well, I think they're just too many, to the extent that I'm just trying to think through. I honestly, as a person, there's this concept of balancing, work-life balancing, honestly, I don't think there's ever such a thing. I think there's some time you actually just immerse yourself in one side, and then you realize that it's almost like a seesaw. So on a day-to-day basis, you find yourself that you're either too much on one side, but again, what is more important is for you to be completely aware. And here I'm talking about the two major sides, which is basically work and life, And sometimes it is something that that this is a short term, that I have this huge assignment, or I have this really huge responsibility that I'm expected to be able to deliver, or I'm going through a phase, maybe it's a budgeting phase, or it's a phase that you're actually developing a strategy, whatever it is. So from time to time you will be making those sacrifices, but what is really important is to be extremely aware of what is happening, so that you can also be quite intentional on the other side. You can actually give them also, in terms of the life side, you can actually be able to immerse yourself a lot more when the opportunity comes. So therefore it's not necessarily balancing, it's actually playing a seesaw. From one time, there's never such a thing that you're actually in the middle and the weights are all equal, but it's just that from time to time there will be one side that is actually suffering a lot more, and then it is to be able to be quite aware of that and actually be very intentional when the time comes that you actually need to make sure that the other side that suffered is actually coming into they also benefit while the other one is actually suffering a bit. And I think that, to me, those are daily sacrifices that any leader does, and especially to a woman, given the multiple roles that we have in the society, in our homes, in our communities. Definitely that is something that I saw myself doing on a day-to-day basis. And in terms of how to being able to cope with that, it's actually to make sure that you're completely self-aware, and you actually give yourself a check from time to time. Yeah.
Have you ever had like several, or rather one vulnerable moment which it may be like life related or career related, that made you question your life goals?
Okay. Vulnerability. That is it's something that we do it very often, but we don't want to accept it, because sometimes people feel like it's actually a weakness. But a big moment that I can reflect on, and will be actually year 2021. As you would know, the whole world, we were all completely confused. We're still confused, but I think we're better off with a little bit more information. Humankind, we work with information. From just the big environmental point of view, yes, there was COVID, and it was quite confusing. It was new ways of working, new ways of doing everything as you would know it. And then that is the same time that the organization that I was working in is also due to the same, turmoil that is going on in the world, which is very much, it's a donor-funded organization. There was a lot of uncertainties that are actually going on. And that was the time that I was actually handed over an overall leadership position within the organization, with very clear objectives that, okay, given the uncertainties that are going in, we really need to make sure that over a short period of time, the organization is actually coming up with a new strategy. The organization is actually going to be able to position and package itself, and actually be able to attract at least the funding that will see it not necessarily ending within a shorter period of time. And yes, guess what? We also have a reduced level of budget. You cannot have all the stuff that you need. And then even the ones that you're going to have, it's going to involve a significant sort of financial cut to the people that you have. So imagine all of those are, intricate scenarios that you're given. But the most critical one is the uncertainty that is actually existing in the market. And the uncertainty that definitely boils down to people's lives, boils down to the talent that you will need in order to be able to deliver that objective. But personally, as a person, that was also the time that that one of the most unfortunate and saddening, I basically lost my mom, at the beginning of that same year. So then you're coming from that environment, and you're handed over this huge responsibility under those very complex circumstances, and you are required, you really feel that, you have a responsibility to make sure that that organization is actually thriving and actually continuing to go to the next level. Honestly, that was a vulnerable moment for me, because I felt like almost like all the odds were actually leading towards failure. Even myself as a person, deep down, I wasn't necessarily quite strong due to the personal issues that were going on. But that was the moment that God chose for me to actually be able to be given this challenge. And, really what I saw myself doing was really to search deep inside me and which is really what I've seen in my career. I usually would actually go deep and actually find the mission, because I came to realize, later in my career, that it is really not about me. It is about something that is much bigger, It's the purpose, it's the mission to which I work for. That is, has to be beyond me and my family, has to be for the greater good of the society, and something that I feel like I should be very proud that I'm actually contributing into. So that's basically what happened throughout this process, despite everything that was negative around the circumstances to see me achieving these key objectives that were on my table. The vulnerability that came was like, okay, God, I'm actually going to fail here, because there's so many things that are working at, against really being able to see through the objective. But then I said, you know what, I need to make sure that I am grounded into the mission, I am grounded into the purpose, and this is exactly what I'm actually going to do to the people that I need to come along. So just being extremely vulnerable with them and actually telling them that, guys, there is nothing that I'm going to promise you that do this because then you will actually be able maybe to retain your job, or do this because you will get this. No, do this because so that we can achieve this big purpose. Do this so that you can come and rally with me, so that we make sure that we actually succeed. And being extremely vulnerable with them, and then being able to win them, and actually to rally them, to actually get the drive from them, to get the commitment from them, and ensuring that as an organization we achieved the objectives, which was basically to make sure that we are coming with a superb strategy. We are ensuring that the organization is actually getting the funding so that it can actually be able to exist beyond the time that actually was going to be the ending for the organization. That's really something that I take as a key really success in my career.
We have seen leaders lead differently. Like they have different styles that they use to actually lead people or organizations. What is your leadership style?
Right. First of all, I actually don't believe I have, I have only one single leadership style, but maybe I'll talk about the dominant one. But just let's talk about, because as a leader, I found myself, depending on the situation and the circumstances and the person, whether they're experienced, they're new, they're expert, and all of that stuff, I saw myself really changing on the circumstances and the situation, and actually be able to give the necessary leadership style that is needed. But naturally, as a person, I tend to be a person that is very much, leading with a style of trusting and a total empowerment. But my job is actually just to steer the direction and then to ensure that you have the necessary, tools and, resources that are actually required for them to actually be able to see through the results. And I've actually seen myself to the extent that sometimes even, most of the time, the glory is theirs, and that is really what you actually end up having at, unearthing the best out of the people for the good, the collective good of the organization. So I've heard this, and actually I started hearing from the people. And most of the time, even the organizations, once I've left the organization, people would come and tell me, I'm like, Irene, it's amazing. With your leadership, I was able to believe in myself. I saw myself achieving a lot more. I was super impressed at the way you actually gave us this trust. And sometimes you were calling me in your office and you would just give me a task, and I would be like, what has she seen in me? And then you would just leave me to go out there as if you think that I can do it. And so I am more of that kind of a person. But just one thing that I think is really critical with that leadership style, which is something that I take it to heart, is the ability to actually be able to ensure that you are actually you're recruiting the right people in your team, because it's not a leadership style that can work with any kind of employee. So I am actually, as a leader, I take my time in making sure that my team has the right people with the right technical capabilities, but what is more important is the aptitude and the attitude and the whole perspective of them being able to actually connected to the cause of the organization, or rather whatever it is, the bigger purpose that we're actually trying to deliver. Because for me, that is really where the secret is. If you don't get that one right and you think that you can have anybody in your team that is not necessarily with the right aptitude and attitude, then definitely that leadership style can actually backfire on you.
Despite the efforts that have been made by the society, or rather I should say like just generally like individuals, organizations, and society in its totality, we are still seeing that there's not an equal number of like leadership between men and women. Like there are fewer women leaders. What do you think is that? What is the problem? What is not solved? What is not done right?
Right. This question is like, okay, fine. I think I think, and I actually like the fact that there's actually a lot more awareness right now of this. This is, it's a problem that has existed for a long period of time. The movement have been there for over 100 years, and a lot has happened, and a lot still needs to happen. And I think to a larger extent, as much as it's a question that is asking me to explain more of the problem, but I would like to actually start at a very, very, a good, more of a positive place to actually acknowledge in the recent past. And if I'm to focus only on Tanzania, we've seen really a huge awareness. We've seen quite a lot of companies actually taking up intentional actions and making sure that they are actually creating an environment that is actually going to be more conducive for women, not only to work in formal employment, but also to actually excel into managerial position and even into leadership position. They are actually allowing the employees to go into the different programs. Some of them are actually, developed within the organization, or promoting the employees to go into other programs that are actually being run in the market. And quite a number of them are there, and intentionally trying to make sure that they are getting a number of females to participate and ensure that we are really promoting women into position of leadership. And I think, I wouldn't even begin anywhere. The fact that we actually have a female president, we all know that is just in itself, that role modeling, that idea of knowing that, yes, it can be done. I feel it, I can see it, I touch it every day, it's on my face. And the effect of that, not only on us, some of us who already, stayed in career and we've moved into the ranks, but on the young women that have actually are starting their careers, but also on our girls, that are coming up is in itself a huge accelerator for really promoting women into the workspace and leadership position. So the reason, which is basically the question that you asked, it is basically for the longest time, this is a societal norm issue, and it's for the longest time I feel like people were not accepting that it is a problem. And the reason why they were not accepting is because of the roles, the traditional roles that we actually used of. And then there was fear, a fear of, okay, so what would happen? What would happen to the society? What would happen to the children? What would happen to the homes, So, and then there were also the other side, which is basically being blind. Completely. People are like, okay, what is the problem? How come we still have the girls in the offices, they're working, we have the managers? What is everybody talking about? This is not even a problem. So, it's things like that. But it took a while, and then at some stage we took it as an activism, an act of activism. But it's really not an act of activism. I like the fact that when we started being so factual about it, we started bringing out facts and figures that this makes economic sense. I remember there was this IFC report that came. The world will actually benefit $172 trillion in terms of economic benefit if we basically allow more gender, diversity. And then many reports are actually bringing us, say, companies that are actually having more diversified boards, more diversified leadership. We can see, we can measure, they are actually doing a lot more better. So now I love that angle, because that's like, it is about economic sense. You know, women are like, in Tanzania, in terms of statistics, 51% of the Tanzanians are actually women. If you allow them to participate a lot more into the economy and actually bring a lot more into the table, that means it makes sense on the bottom line. And actually, I think that is really where we are, which is really beautiful. Yeah.
We have seen like women out here who would really like to one day be like leaders in different organizations, in different industries. Now, what would you tell like women who aspire leadership positions in different industries?
What I would tell the women, first of all, what I really like about the young girls, I mean, you can see the confidence that is actually coming out of them. You can see the strong articulation. And as I said earlier on, I mean, we have such a huge advantage. I'm such a proud daughter of the Tanzanian soul, because having the president there, it just means so much. And of course, I'm just talking about just the one figure, but we know that there is a lot more than the president. So that is important. You know, while you're growing up, you really need to see this, and you find yourself, you are moving yourself beyond your boundaries, and you know that it can be done because you can see it, you can feel it. So what I can actually give them as an advice, I know they already have the confidence, and I know that they're already seeing people in their society all the way to the top of the country. So I just want to encourage them to put in the works and actually being more intentional with their leadership journey. One of the things that I wish I did a lot more earlier in my career was actually being very formal with finding a mentor, you know. As much as, you know, later on in my career, I had formal mentors that I was actually really, you know, using them, and they were actually, we were meeting on a more regular basis, as opposed to before that, it was more somebody would be my mentor without even them knowing, because I was just shadowing, I was just watching, and things like that. But sometimes being so intentional about it and being able to track it and measure it and put, you know, and talk about it and discuss some of the challenges, maybe I could have done a lot more better. There were certain twists and turns. I look back, I'm like, maybe that was not a very good move. And if I actually had somebody that I was able to talk to a lot earlier, maybe the outcome could have been different. So I'm actually advising them to be more intentional about it, they should actually chatter out what they want, imagine all the impossibilities, and put in the hard work, and the discipline is really critical. They shouldn't think that people have just gotten into the position just overnight. Yes, it can happen overnight, but it's not. Most of the time, it's actually not overnight, and most of the time, it's a lot of hard work and some and challenges, and but still being committed and very passionate, and actually being fixed to a bigger role. And you need somebody to guide you along the way. You really need somebody to be able to talk to, and they can actually be vulnerable, and they can actually be able to explain, even in ways you might actually be looking at them and thinking that it's all rosy, but it's not, you know. So then you need to be able to hear that from someone you trust, so that you're actually being encouraged to ensure that you stay on course.
What are the myths that surround women leadership, and how should they be debunked?
Honestly, I'm such a positive-minded person, and I struggle to stay on the negative, you know, of things. And I'm also a Christian and a believer that sometimes I just don't like to repeat things, because I feel like the more you repeat them, it's the more you're giving them time, even in your body and in your language and in your life. So what I can actually tell, I mean, the myths are there. The many female leaders are very aggressive. Female leaders, they're not supporting, women don't support other women's. You know, there's so many things, you know, that have been said. And I think the only thing I can actually tell young girls, young leaders, is, you know, at the end of the day, stay on course. You know, at the end of the day, let the result speak for itself, you know. At the end of the day, yes, we do not have to bring in the male sort of behavior into work for you to prove yourself that you're a leader. And yes, you can be vulnerable. That's okay, because that's not a sign of weakness. That's just a sign that you're a human being. And you can ask for help. And yes, it is okay sometimes not to be in balance, as I said earlier. But at the end of the day, be quite aware of who you are and your responsibilities, and what you want to achieve, and they can actually be achieved. So that is the way to debunk them. But what is really at the center of everything is just to make sure that you deliver results. And for me, that is what I've actually seen. You see young girls, they come, and even myself in my career, people will actually come to you because they're like, okay, you can trust this person. You go to this person, things can get delivered. You go to this person, impossibilities can actually happen. And that's all you need.
Undoubtedly busy. So, how do you practice self-care? There is the misconception that leaders are they're usually busy. How do you make time for yourself?
Well, I think I've answered that one, and it actually comes from the act of being extremely self-aware that you're a person, you're not a thing, and as a person, you need to make sure that whatever is important to you is well understood by you, and not necessarily by anybody else's standard, because most of the time people will bring in these words, that, hey, oh my goodness, you're so busy, you don't even have time for your family. Who are you to judge? Talk to my family. Talk to my family. You're not with me 24/7. You're just assuming. But some of those things, they'll come there, and you just, not necessarily, I'm not trying to tell that they shouldn't come to you, but it is you, how you receive them and how you allow them to come into your body. You will not allow them to come into your body if you know who you are and you know exactly how you're dividing your time, or basically how you're playing with your seesaw. You know exactly that when it comes to Saturday, this is a day that I've actually completely reserved it for my family. I will make sure I catch up on this side. I'll make sure I catch up on the other side. On Sunday, I'll make sure that I really, catch up with my community work. I catch up with my larger family issues. So somebody coming in because maybe they see you in meetings, they see you in forums, and then they make that judgment. That should not necessarily, you shouldn't allow for it to come through to you.
What are the things that you do to actually help to reduce the gap, or to help in gender diversity? What are the things that you do to actually help you pull other women up?
Okay. I think for me, first and foremost is I've seen myself in the various leadership positions. I have given an opportunity, to the young girls that I was privileged to have them in my team, And as I said earlier, for me, one of the things that really worked in my career is actually to receive a trust from someone who looked at me and just one day just gave me a responsibility that I was like, I went home and I started knocking my head. I was like, what did that person see in me? And I will never forget that, because from that moment on, everything else was just a different world. So I always remember to do that. So for the young girls who I actually see potential, I allow them to come through. I give them a platform. I allow them to really spring off. And for me, that has been my own way in the different roles that I've actually had. Leadership role is to make sure that I do that to the girls. But I also provide a lot of mentorship. I have people who consider me as their trusted confidant, who consider me as someone that can actually come and actually be able to get guided and just to hear my story and to, sometimes try to figure out some of the complex challenges that they're actually going through. And just me sitting there and actually just being able to talk to them and encourage them means a lot, because sometimes they'll come back, after a while, and they will say something to me, and I'll be like, really, you believe it was me? And I know that it was more of them, but I know that I had a part in whatever little way that I conducted myself, or I did whatever I did, but I allowed them to actually be able to come into my world and actually be able to walk the journey with me. So that's a mentorship on the other side. But also I was very intentional. Because when I was actually, having my children, I remember, especially my firstborn, I remember how I felt, as a senior manager at that time, being away from work, and it was necessary, yes, to devote my time and to concentrate entirely on something so beautiful that has happened to me, and as a mother and that role, I am not against it. But then coming in, the insecurity that I came back with, 3-4 months later, you're coming to a job and you feel completely, you are detached. Time has actually passed. And it's more the insecurity within you, and it's not necessarily even real. But as you would know in life, everything starts with you. So that experience really, I made sure that every time in the different roles that I actually had, when a woman goes for maternity, I give them the choice. I give them the choice if they want to stay connected. I'm not necessarily asking them to do the work, but just even allowing them to continue getting the emails, allowing them from time to time, even just call them impromptu. It's not as if I needed to hear from them. I'm like, what would you, so-and-so? We're going through this situation. What do you think about it? And they will just talk you through. Or sometimes you just throw a document. You're like, if you have time, when you have time, please just read it and just tell me whatever you think. For me, that was just a very small trick. But it means a lot because I experienced it. And I felt like, you come back and you feel you don't know nothing. Everybody, you're already something of the past. Things have moved ahead. So I actually did that trick quite a lot. And then more formally, with my recent employment, that was, the job that I felt like it was important for us as an organization to go through a gender assessment, process to see internally how, as an organization, first of all, we remove the blindness, we become gender aware, and we know the position of what is it that we need to do as an organization to actually encourage more diversity. And then at the same time, because it was critical, the role that I had was more towards making sure that Tanzania is more inclusive. So we needed to do that outward. And if you need to do that more outward, you need to make sure, first of all, internally, you are more aware and you address those diversity issue internally before you can put up a strategy that is actually going to go at a national level. So there I saw myself doing those gender assessment, aligning the policy, diversity policy internally within the organization, and seeing really, more diversity coming through. Even the number of employees that we had that were women at the time that I took on that role was like 30%. By the time I left the role, was around 50 to 60%. You are getting women and across all positions. But also, most importantly, we were able to respond to the market and be able to support the financial sector to be more gender inclusive by doing different research and actually bringing out the analytics and allowing, supporting the financial services provider to incorporate products and solutions that are actually more gender sensitive and will allow women to participate equally in the economy. Yes.
I think we're done. Thank you so much for taking part in this.